The morning light slips through the blinds and finds Sophia at her kitchen table, coffee cooling beside a stack of bills and a laptop open to last month's bank statements. She rubs her forehead and hears, as if echoing from somewhere deep, two voices. One is small, crouched in the corner, "You don't have enough. It's too risky. Wait until things are perfect." The other is calm, curious, like someone who reads maps. "What can I build from here? What information do I need? What is the smallest, smart step I can take right now?" Outside, the neighborhood wakes, kids on bicycles, a delivery truck backing up, life moving. Inside, the choice feels heavier. Sophia remembers the night she told her partner, "I'm tired of being at the mercy of bills." He reached for her hand and asked, gently, "Do you want to continue reacting, or do you want to try building?" The question landed like a pebble, rippling across the surface of her fear. This is where the journey begins, not with a sudden windfall, but with an identity shift. The victim narrates scarcity and waits for rescue. The investor scans resources, gathers information, and treats setbacks as data. The law of attraction doesn't reward wishful thinking, it magnifies identity. If you speak from helplessness, you attract hesitation. If you speak from responsible possibility, opportunities begin to line up like magnets. Sophia starts small. She opens a spreadsheet, not to punish but to understand. She calls a friend who runs a small business and asks, "How did you start?" The friend answers with real numbers, awkward admissions, and practical strategies. That candidness does something, it makes a future thinkable. Decisions become less like leaps in the dark and more like calculated steps. Responsibility, she discovers, is not pressure, it is the quiet muscle that widens choice. You might recognize these voices in your own life, at the supermarket, at the kitchen table, scrolling late at night. If you feel that nudge, press like, "Does this sound like you, reacting or building?" Subscribe quietly and come with me. In the next moment you'll meet the first real test that separates reaction from investment, and we'll learn how to gather the facts that turn fear into strategy. The morning light slips through kitchen blinds, dust motes suspended like small doubts. On the table, a stack of envelopes, bills, a past due notice, leans against a chipped mug. Alex stares at the phone, the bank app glowing an amount that tightens the chest. He breathes out and hears the old script rise, "I can't, I'm stuck, if only." The house is quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft thud of a child's drawing on the fridge, reminders of why change matters and how heavy can't feels when it clings to every choice. A knock at the door breaks the loop. It's Maya, a neighbor and the kind of person who carries calm like a tool. She sits at the table, picks up a bill, and says without judgment, "Tell me what you think is true about money right now." Alex lists fears, lack of control, wrong timing, the belief that opportunities have to be big to matter. Maya listens and then asks, "What would you do if you treated this like an investment question instead of a verdict?" He blinks. She leans in. "What can you build from here?" That question lands like a seed. It feels almost too small to be useful, but Alex finds himself whispering it aloud, tasting the difference. "Where I can't shut doors, what can I build?" opens a sliver of light. They move from abstract despair to specific, manageable steps, gather information, list one low-risk option, call the bank to negotiate fees, schedule a meeting with a financial coach, read one article a night. Each tiny action is an experiment in identity, choosing the posture of someone who investigates and creates rather than someone who waits for rescue. Maya watches him reframe sentences, "I'll look into options," instead of "I don't know," and explains how the law of attraction doesn't magic money into existence, it amplifies who you are. Speak scarcity and you attract caution, speak possibility and you notice doors. He makes a note, decision over permission. It feels like a quiet rebellion against old habits. If this landing feels familiar, tap like and tell me, what small question could you ask today? Stay with us. Next, Alex takes that first aligned action, and nothing looks the same afterward. The kitchen light buzzes low as she spreads receipts across the table, an army of small papers that used to feel like proof of defeat. Tonight, though, there's a different rhythm, a notebook labeled options beside a well-worn book on behavioral finance, a mug with cooling tea, and the soft glow of a laptop open to a calculator. The voice in her head that once said, "This is impossible," now asks, quietly, "What can I build from here?" He walks in, leaves his jacket on the chair and watches for a moment. "You look different," he says, half teasing, half worried. "I stopped waiting to be rescued," she answers. "I'm not pretending the problems aren't real. I'm learning them." She taps the notebook. Small experiments. Low risk. Information first. They talk like two travelers mapping a route. "What if we start with a 30-day budget test," he suggests. "Just track everything. Then we meet with that financial coach you mentioned." She smiles, feeling a steadier pulse. The investor inside her asks questions instead of making excuses. What does the cash flow really look like? Where is fear showing up as a decision? Which small, reversible step teaches the most? These become her tools: data, curiosity, and disciplined follow-through, rather than reasons to freeze. On the bus to a free seminar, she listens to a woman describe compounding and time not as a thief but as an ally. The law she's studied in whispers, what you resonate with expands, suddenly feels practical. Belief is not mystical fluff, it shapes attention. When she whispers, "I can learn this," the world seems to hand her learning: a book left on a bench, a friendly volunteer with a spreadsheet, an online course on sliding sale. Risk becomes manageable because she reframes it: uncertainty plus action equals learning. Responsibility loses its pressure and becomes power. She practices new phrases aloud: "How can I test this? What information do I need? If this fails, what will I learn?" A neighbor knocks to ask about pruning the garden. She explains a budgeting method as if sharing a recipe: calm, confident, contagious. People around her begin to see her not as someone defeated but as someone building. Does this feel familiar to you, too, ready to stop reacting and start constructing? If so, like this story and stay with us, the next step shows the first deliberate move she takes and how the world answers. The kitchen light spills across a stack of envelopes and a laptop glowing with account balances. She sits there, hands wrapped around a warm mug, listening to two voices. One murmurs the familiar script: "This is just how life is. Too late, too risky." The other, quieter at first, asks, "What can I build from here?" She breathes, and the hum of the refrigerator feels like the steady beat of a new possibility. Her phone buzzes. It's Marco, an old colleague who became the kind of person who reads balance sheets for fun. "Look," he says when she answers, his voice measured. "Start with information. Not promises. What can you learn this week? What small experiment can you run that won't break anything?" His words land like a map sketched on a table: gather, test, protect. She imagines a staircase instead of a cliff. She begins to catalogue subscriptions she no longer uses, hours that could be traded for freelance work, a forgotten 401k with a balance small enough to move but big enough to teach. The language in her head shifts: "I can't afford" becomes "I choose to allocate," "I'm helpless" becomes "I'm learning." Each phrase is a muscle she decides to exercise. The law of attraction, she remembers, amplifies identity. If she practices being the investor, curious, responsible, strategic, her world will start to reflect that posture. That afternoon she opens a small spreadsheet, not to punish but to plan. Columns for risk, time, expected learning. She texts a neighbor about a weekend workshop on basic investing. The neighbor replies with a link. A social media post she almost scrolls past mentions micro-investing apps, an invitation she didn't know she needed. Coincidence? Or the universe responding to a new frequency, someone who is asking the right questions? Fear doesn't disappear. It sits at the table like a quiet guest. She acknowledges it. "What if I lose this?" she whispers, and answers, "Then I learn something. Then I adjust." Responsibility, she discovers, is not pressure, it's permission to act. An action, even small, changes history. She transfers a modest sum into a learning fund, an intentional move, not a gamble, and feels the subtle click of identity aligning with intention. Do you see yourself at this table, choosing to gather rather than blame? If this resonates, tap like and stay with me. Next we watch how that first disciplined step grows into a repeatable strategy that keeps risk guarded and opportunity visible. The morning light finds her at the kitchen table, a mug warming her hands while a thin stack of envelopes leans like a quiet accusation. Outside, the neighborhood hums with ordinary life. Inside, the old script runs: worry, blame, waiting for something to change. Then a different voice, softer and steadier, pushes through: what can I build from here? It isn't the thunder of certainty but the patient curiosity of an investor surveying a landscape. She crosses out the word helpless from her mental ledger and writes prototype. In the living room, the scene shifts to small, deliberate moves. She opens a spreadsheet with the calm focus of someone checking blueprints. The numbers are real, not monsters: savings, obligations, time. A neighbor drops by and notices the steadiness. "You look different," he says. She smiles, surprised by her own steadiness. "I'm learning to ask better questions," she answers. Not a why me, but what can I do next? That question becomes a dual, clear, refracting option she hadn't considered. The hero's journey deepens with practical trials. She reads, calls an advisor, talks to a friend who started a side project, watches a short investment tutorial on her phone while waiting for the bus. Each small action rewires belief. Gathering information replaces paralysis, small tests replace dramatic leaps, boundaries protect momentum. Her inner monologue changes from "I can't risk" to "how much risk is smart." Responsibility stops being a heavy cloak and becomes a tool belt, calibrated, useful, empowering. There are setbacks, an unexpected repair bill, a hesitant broker, but they no longer define her identity. She learns to name the fear and move through it with measured steps. The law of attraction does its quiet work. Who she believes she is begins attracting who and what she needs. Opportunities pirouette into view not because luck changed but because she did. If this moment resonates, tap like and tell me in the comments which identity shows up first for you, or the victim or the investor. Stay with her journey. In the next scene she will make her first aligned financial decision and we will watch how small choices compound into visible possibilities. The morning light slants through the blinds as our protagonist sits at the kitchen table, coffee cooling, a stack of invoices and a notebook between fingers that tremble less than they did weeks before. The victim in them wants to push everything aside. "It's not my fault," a small voice insists, but another voice, quieter and steadier, asks a different question: what can I build from here? They close the notebook, breathe, and begin to list what they know, not what they fear. The scene shifts to a local cafe where laughter and the clink of cups form a background rhythm. Across from them is Anna, a neighbor who started a small rental portfolio at 48 and still remembers how uncertain she felt. "You don't need to be sure," Anna says, stirring her tea. "You need to be curious and consistent." The protagonist feels the courage to ask, "How did you start without a safety net?" Anna smiles, recounting late nights of reading, one conversation with a bank officer, and a tiny first investment that taught her how to say no to scarcity. We cut to images of hand-scanning websites, taking notes during a webinar, making 3 calls in a row, some met with polite indifference, others opening doors. The law of attraction shows its quiet mechanics here. As the protagonist chooses the identity of the investor, attention shifts. Opportunities that once felt invisible are now visible because the mind is trained to notice them. Risk becomes a puzzle, not a verdict. They gather information, compare scenarios, and write worst-case plans that feel strangely freeing. The camera lingers on the simple ritual of setting aside 30 minutes each evening to study markets, to practice the language of abundance instead of complaint. Nervousness remains, nights when doubt knocks, but a new posture has replaced paralysis, responsibility as a muscle, not a burden. Dialogue returns in a brief exchange with a partner at the dining table. "Are you really going to do this?" "I'm going to start building," they reply. It's not bravado, it's a recalibration. The protagonist makes the first aligned decision, a small, calculated step that costs little but signals everything. Before they leave the house, they pause and ask themselves the question Anna asked weeks before: what can I build from here? If that question changed them, what will happen when the first test of their new identity arrives? The kitchen light hummed as she spread the papers out like a small map: bank statements, a half-filled notebook, the pamphlet from the financial workshop she'd promised herself she'd read. Across from her, the mirror on the cupboard reflected two faces, one pulled tight by worry, the other calm and curious. "I don't know how to start," the first said, voice edged with blame. The investor leaned forward, soft but steady. "What can we learn from this?" he asked. That single question turned the room from courtroom to workshop. We follow her as she becomes deliberate. She calls the bank, not to complain, but to ask questions she hasn't allowed herself to ask before. What are my fees? What options do I have for small automatic investments? How do I set a realistic emergency buffer? Each answer is data, not destiny. She hears about interest, timelines, and risk in neutral language. Each fact becomes a tool. Outside, a neighbor mowing the lawn becomes a reminder: growth is incremental, daily work. Inside, she experiments: a modest weekly transfer, a tiny budget adjustment for joy, a trial allocation toward a low-cost index fund. Risk is managed, not feared. Curiosity replaces paralysis. At night she journals a different script. Instead of "I can't afford that," she writes, "How might I shift resources to create that opportunity?" She practices phrasing aloud: "What can I build from here?" And the repetition reshapes not only plans but posture. The law of attraction, she learns, does not magically conjure money, it amplifies the identity that issues the signal. A trembling victim frequency pulls problems into view, a steadying investor frequency attracts options and collaborators. When she speaks this way, emails arrive with possibilities she'd previously ignored. A neighbor mentions a side project. A friend suggests a book. Small openings, then one larger choice. A conversation with her son crystallizes everything. "You've changed how you decide," he says. She smiles, feeling responsibility as freedom. Responsibility is the muscle that makes possibility usable. If this moment resonates, give it a like and tell me which identity showed up for you today. Subscribe if you want the next practical step, because next, we map the first 3 small investments that actually move the needle, and how to arrange them so each decision compounds into real prosperity. Morning light slides across the kitchen table while she spreads out a notebook, a small army of sticky notes, and her laptop, a quiet battlefield. The old voice, the victim, still whispers, "What if you lose everything?" But she leans into a different question, softer and steadier: "What can I build from here?" Across the room, her partner pours coffee and watches without interrupting. The tension is a live wire between them, equal parts fear and hope. She says aloud, "I'll start small: 1 emergency fund goal, 1 investment course, 1 conversation with a financial advisor." That spoken sentence changes the weather in the room. Saying it aloud invites structure. Saying it aloud moves her from reaction to plan. Outside, the city hums, a busker tunes a guitar, a dog barks, a bank branch glows. Each ordinary sound becomes confirmation that life goes on whether she waits or moves. She calls a friend who has been an investor longer, and the line is candid: "You don't need certainty to act. You need a map and the courage to walk." The friend gives 3 practical steps: gather information, test small, measure results. She writes them down, but she also feels something else shift, a permission to be fallible and keep going. The law of attraction, she notices, is not magic without work, it's an amplifier of identity. When she practices being resourceful, opportunities begin to surface: an unexpected side gig, a book recommendation, a discount on a course. The universe isn't doing it for her, it's mirroring who she shows up as. There are setbacks: the spreadsheet shows a bigger gap than she thought, a call from a creditor rattles her, but the investor in her makes a different choice than the victim ever would. She asks, "What can I learn right now?" and then she acts. Each small decision, calling for a payment plan, automating a tiny transfer to savings, saying no to an impulse purchase, compounds into momentum. If this scene sits with you, tap like and tell me in the comments, what small investment will you make in yourself this week? Subscribe and stay with me, and next, we'll take that first concrete step together and turn intention into a visible plan. He sits at the kitchen table as morning light edges across a stack of papers: mortgage notice, a faded savings passbook, a college fund brochure. For years those sheets felt like evidence of helplessness. Today they are blueprints. He breathes, hand steady. "What can I build from here?" he asks aloud, not to magic but to himself. The question steadies him like a compass. Across town, she closes her laptop after a long day, the small lamp casting a warm pool of light on handwritten notes, ideas for a side business she's been dreaming of, a budget that finally reflects her priorities, a list of people to call. She imagines conversations instead of catastrophes. "How can I test this?" she asks. That tiny change, curiosity instead of complaint, begins to rearrange the world. They start gathering information with the investor's posture, not to be paralyzed by what they don't know, but to collapse unknowns into manageable steps. He speaks to an accountant who uses simple language. She watches 3 short tutorials and scribbles questions. They build small experiments: a modest monthly investment, a part-time project that aligns with values, a conversation with a neighbor who runs a successful small business. Each test is a controlled risk, a way to learn, not a wager with fate. Dialogue becomes practice. "What's the downside of trying?" she asks her partner. "What would I lose?" He hears himself answer truthfully: mostly time and comfort, not identity. They set stop-loss limits on money and soft deadlines on effort. Responsibility replaces panic. The law of attraction, once a whisper, begins to echo. The identity they hold, investor, curious and accountable, attracts different information, different people, different openings. Opportunities that were invisible begin to appear: a returned phone call, an unexpected freelance gig, a bank rep who outlines a realistic plan. Each small success is not proof they've arrived but a map confirming direction. The narrative shifts from "why me" to "what next," and with that the protagonist's posture changes: taller, quieter, unafraid of imperfect steps. If this scene resonates, consider this: what one small experiment could you start this week? Like if you feel the shift, and subscribe to follow the next movement, where decisions compound and the investor's posture becomes steady momentum. In the next moment, the stakes sharpen and the real test of identity begins. The morning after the choice, she sits at the same kitchen table where worry used to live, but the light hits the paper differently now. The bank statement is the same shape it always was, the call still waiting in a list on her phone, and yet something in her voice has changed. She leans forward, places a pen on the page, and asks, softly, "What can I build from here?" That single question rearranges the room. It makes space for plans, for measurements instead of complaints, for curiosity instead of fear. Across town, a neighbor watches as he converts small savings into a tiny investment, a course, a consultation, a deliberate risk with a safety net. He hears the inner voice that used to say, "I can't," and answers with another, "How would an investor approach this?" The answer arrives as steps: gather one more piece of information, call one expert, take one modest action. No heroics. Just steady placement of stones across a river. You remember the mentor in our story, her voice steady, not shameful. Responsibility is not pressure, it's power. You repeat it in the shower, in the car, when the old victim leans in. The victim's language is small: blame, delay, if only. The investor's language is immediate and precise: assess, allocate, act. Each time you choose the latter, the law of attraction begins to hum differently. Not because life owes you something, but because you are signaling who you intend to be. The world responds to the person you embody. There are moments of doubt, calls not returned, plans that bend, but you keep the posture, collect data, manage risk, adjust. You celebrate the micro wins: a clearer budget, a brave conversation, a new client. You see opportunity where previously there was only obstacle. And with each decision, your inner map redraws itself. If this landed with you today, let that quiet shift show, tap like so this message finds others who need it. What is one small, practical step you will take this week? Share it below. Your words might be the next person's nudge. If you want steady guidance for turning choices into momentum, subscribe and come build this life with me. The next chapter waits, ready for the hands that will make it real.